At a star-studded movie premiere, a fearless 2-year-old girl adorably steals popcorn from Keanu Reeves. Instead of reacting with annoyance, Keanu's response melts, hearts triggering an unforgettable moment of warmth, laughter, and deep emotional connection. His kindness not only touches the child's life, but also brings unexpected healing to a struggling single mother. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Los Angeles shimmered under a canopy of flashing lights and anticipation. The grand movie premiere, one of the most anticipated events of the year, was alive with the electric hum of celebrities, journalists, and industry elites. A sea of designer gowns and sharp tuxedos flooded the venue. Each person eager for the dazzling spectacle that was about to unfold. Young Keanu Reeves arrived with his usual quiet, grace-dressed, simply avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. Despite the whirlwind of flashing cameras and eager reporters, he moved with an effortless humility that made him stand out from the rest. Just a few seats away, Emily Carter, a 31-year-old single mother, clutched the small hand of her 2-year-old daughter, Lily. Unlike the Hollywood elite that surrounded her, Emily wasn't famous, nor did she wear designer clothes. She was here purely by luck. A fortunate industry connection had landed her 2 last-minute tickets for Emily. This night wasn't just about glamour or mingling with celebrities. It was about giving Lily a memory to cherish, a moment of magic in their otherwise challenging life. Raising a daughter alone after being abandoned by her partner before Lily's birth had been anything but easy. Emily had sacrificed everything, putting her dream of becoming a screenwriter on hold, barely making meet yet. Tonight, she wanted to forget the struggles and simply enjoy the moment with her daughter. But Lily, a fearless, golden-haired toddler with big, curious eyes, had other plans as the previews rolled and the lights dimmed. Lily's attention was drawn away from the massive screen to something far more intriguing, the irresistible buttery aroma of popcorn. She sniffed the air, eyes locking onto the overflowing tub of popcorn, sitting on the lap of the man seated just a few spots away, without hesitation, with the innocent determination only a child could have. She slipped off her seat, waddling toward the bucket like a tiny food bandit. Her chubby fingers stretched out, completely unaware of the world around her. The audience held their breath. Whispers trickled through the theater as people recognized who she was. Approaching the man with the popcorn, the Keanu Reeves sat completely unaware that he was about to become part of the evening's most unexpected, heart-melting moment. Then, just as Lily reached into the bucket and grabbed a handful of popcorn, the room fell silent. Would he be annoyed? Would he gently shoo her away? Or would he do something that would leave everyone in the theater utterly speechless for a split second? The Grand Theater, buzzing with the anticipation of the premiere, fell into a curious hush. Eyes darted T, the tiny girl standing in front of one of Hollywood's most recognizable figures. Her chubby fingers wrapped around a fistful of stolen popcorn. A few gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by an amused chuckle here and there. All attention turned to Keanu Reeves, the cameras, the flashing lights, the industry elite. It all faded into the background as Lily, a 2-year-old with golden curls and bright, curious eyes, stood there, munching on the popcorn she had taken without the slightest hesitation. Keanu's reaction, however, would be what people remembered that night. Not the movie, not the A-list actors, but this simple, heartwarming moment. At first, he blinked in surprise, glancing down at the toddler who had so boldly helped herself to his snack. Then, as if the absurdity of the situation suddenly hit him, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. One of those rare, unguarded smiles that instantly softened his features instead of pulling the bucket away or scolding the child. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and whispered something that made Lily erupt into giggles. The tension in the theater dissolved laughter, and warmth filled the space, and a wave of collective adoration swept through the audience. Emily, still in her seat, felt her heart drop into her stomach as she realized what had just happened. Panic surged through her veins as she bolted up, making her way toward Lily, her face flushed with embarrassment, her mind racing with apologies she had yet to form. "I am so sorry," she started breathlessly, scooping Lily into her arms. She's still learning boundaries, but before she could finish, Keanu held up a gentle, reassuring hand. "It's all right," he said, with that signature calmness, his voice steady and kind. Then, crouching down to Lily's level, he held out the popcorn bucket again, offering it to her. "Popcorn always tastes better when it's shared," he said warmly. A soft murmur of admiration swept through the crowd. Someone clapped, someone else snapped a photo, but Emily could only stare, overwhelmed by the sheer kindness in his eyes. Most celebrities would have shied away, or worse, made a scene out of the interruption. But Keanu didn't treat Lily like an inconvenience. He treated her like a person, a tiny, fearless person who had reminded him, if only for a fleeting moment, of something he had long forgotten. Emily, still clutching Lily in her arms, felt a lump rise in her throat. She had spent the past 2 years navigating life's hardships alone, struggling with bills, dreams deferred, and the heavy silence of loneliness. But in that moment, something about the way Keanu looked at Lily, a flicker of something unspoken, something Emily couldn't quite place, made her wonder if he understood that kind of loneliness too. For a moment, Keanu was somewhere else, caught in a distant memory, his gaze drifting just past Emily, as if looking through time itself, a memory of his own childhood, of laughter and small, joyful moments like this. Or maybe he was remembering someone he had lost. The thought hit Emily like a wave. She had read about Keanu's life. Before his long, his tragedies, his baby daughter lost, before she could even take her first breath. The love of his life gone too. Soon, his younger sister Kim, whose childhood had been stolen by illness. Had he ever held a child since then? Had he ever dared? To the thought made Emily's chest tighten. Maybe in some way, Lily had unknowingly given him that moment. Lily, of course, was oblivious to the depth of what had just happened. She simply grinned, stuffing another handful of popcorn into her mouth, her blue eyes twinkling with delight. "Popcorn, good," she declared, her voice full of innocent joy. Keanu chuckled. "That it is," he agreed. The entire audience seemed to soften, the usual walls of Hollywood prestige momentarily crumbling in the face of such pure, unfiltered human connection. In that theater, amidst all the flashing cameras, the elite conversations, and the polished personas, this tiny moment of innocence, kindness, and unexpected connection had become the heart of the night. As Emily adjusted Lily on her hip, she felt Keanu's gaze return to her. This time it wasn't distant, it was present, grounded, and for reasons she couldn't quite explain, it sent a shiver down her spine. "Thank you," she said. Softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of conversations around them. Keanu tilted his head slightly. "For what?" Emily swallowed. "For treating my daughter like she mattered, for not making me feel small." For this moment, she wanted to say it all, but the words caught in her throat. "For being you." She finally managed. Keanu held her gaze for a second longer, his expression unreadable. Then, just as the theater dimmed, for the movie to begin, he smiled. Not the kind of smile meant for cameras or fans or the industry. A real one that said he understood. As Emily made her way back to her seat, Lily, still happily munching on popcorn, she couldn't shake the feeling that this night wasn't just another Hollywood event. It was the beginning of something else entirely. The theater's massive screen flickered to life, filling the room with the soft glow of cinematic storytelling. The world outside, paparazzi flashing cameras, and Hollywood's elite seemed to fade into the background. But for Keanu Reeves, something about this night had shifted. He could still hear the tiny crunches of popcorn, could still feel the light press of little fingers against his bucket. Lily's innocence, her unfiltered joy, had unexpectedly unearthed a part of him that had been buried for far too long. As the movie played, he stole a glance toward Emily and Lily, seated just a few seats away. Lily had nestled into her mother's side, tiny hands still gripping a few pieces of popcorn, her blue eyes blinking sleepily at the screen. Emily gently stroked her golden curls, whispering something soothing as Lily shifted, seeking warmth. Keanu's breath hitched. It was a sight so achingly familiar, a memory of soft curls, the echo of a child's laughter, the weight of something fragile and beautiful slipping away before he had the chance to hold on. Kim, his younger sister, or maybe Ava, the daughter he never got to meet. The movie droned on, but Keanu barely registered it. His mind was drifting, sinking into a past that still ashed. No matter how many years had passed, he had once been the one sitting beside a small child, watching her eyes light up at the magic of a film. He had once carried her on his shoulders through bustling streets, shared ice cream on warm summer days, watched her steal his food when she thought he wasn't looking, his little sister Kim, his closest friend, his anchor. When life became too heavy, she had been so full of life until suddenly she wasn't. Keanu shifted in his seat, clenching his fists subtly. The past had a way of creeping in at the most unexpected times. It wasn't just Kim's face that haunted him. Now it was Jennifer, his great love. The woman who had once carried his child there, Ava, whose presence had never even had the chance to exist outside of a dream. A daughter who never saw a single sunrise, and yet, sitting here watching Lily steal his popcorn with complete trust and joy, he felt something stir in his chest, something painful yet warm, bittersweet yet grounding. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years, the weight of what was lost, but also the quiet possibility of something new. Keanu forced himself to exhale. Slowly pressing his fingers against the worn fabric of his jeans, he had spent so many years in solitude, convincing himself that certain joys were no longer meant for him, that laughter as pure as Lily's or warmth as present as Emily's belonged to a different life, a different version of himself. And yet here they were, a mother and daughter who had somehow reminded him that life still had space for softness, for connection. He wasn't sure if it terrified him or gave him hope. Emily, though engrossed in the film, couldn't shake the feeling that Keanu was lost in something deeper. She could sense it, a heaviness lingering in the air between them, something unspoken yet tangible. It wasn't the look of someone merely enjoying a movie. It was someone remembering something they had long tried to forget, the way his jaw tensed, the flicker of something dark in his eyes before he forced himself to refocus. It all told her more than words ever could. She didn't know his story, not all of it, but she had read the headlines years ago, the quiet tragedy that seemed to follow Keanu wherever he went, the daughter he lost before she could take her first breath, the love he buried before they could build a future together. And now, here he was, sitting beside a little girl who had unknowingly touched a wound he had long since locked away. Emily swallowed. She knew that look. She had seen it in her own reflection many nights before, when Lily was asleep, when the world was quiet, when the weight of being a single mother crushed her in ways she never voiced, the grief of wanting more, but fearing it would slip away the moment she allowed herself to reach for it. For so long, she had told herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could handle it alone, because letting people in meant risking loss. But now, sitting so close to Keanu, watching him wrestle with ghosts she couldn't see, she wondered if maybe, just be, he understood. And maybe he had been alone for too long too. The movie ended. The applause filling the theater as credits rolled, but Keanu barely moved, his eyes still fixed on the screen, or maybe on something else entirely. It wasn't until Lily stirred, stretching with a sleepy yawn, that he seemed to return to the present. She rubbed her eyes, looking up at him, blurry, more popcorn. She mumbled, her voice small and drowsy. Keanu let out a breath, a quiet chuckle, barely there but real. "I think we finished it," he said softly. Emily smiled as she adjusted Lily in her arms. "You made a serious friend tonight," she teased. Keanu met her gaze, then something unreadable in his expression, a quiet depth, a silent acknowledgement. "Yeah," he murmured, his voice gentle. "I think I did for a moment." Neither of them moved. The world outside waited, FLing cameras, roaring fans, the chaos of Hollywood's unrelenting energy. But inside this moment, inside this quiet pocket of time, where Lily had unknowingly bridged the gap between two people who had spent too long lost in their own loneliness, Keanu and Emily simply existed. Two souls who, against all odds, had found an unexpected connection. And for the first time in a long, long while, Keanu wondered if, maybe this was the start of something new. The theater's credits continued to roll, but Keanu Reeves barely noticed the noise, the movement, the energy of the Hollywood elite swarming around him. It all faded into a dull hum in the background. His focus remained on Lily, still curled sleepily in her mother's arms, her tiny fingers clutching the last remnants of the popcorn bucket, and on Emily, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Something had shifted. He could feel it. The moment had started as something simple, a child's innocent act of curiosity. But now, as Keanu sat there, his heart weighed down by a strange yet familiar ache, he realized that the night had become something much bigger. He was used to people recognizing him for his movies, for his action roles, for the larger-than-life persona the world had crafted around him. But tonight, it wasn't about any of that. Tonight, he was just a man who had been unexpectedly reminded of something he had lost. A warmth, a family, a piece of himself that had been buried under years of grief. Emily adjusted Lily in her arms, her mother's instinct kicking in as she gently stroked the little girl's back. "I should probably get her home before she gets too cranky," she said, with a small, apologetic smile. Keanu hesitated for only a second before responding. "Let me walk you out." Emily blinked in surprise. "You don't have to do that. I'm sure you have a million people waiting to talk to you." Keanu shook his head, offering a faint smile. "They'll survive." Emily studied him for a moment as if trying to gauge whether he meant it, but then she simply nodded, and so they left together. The cool Los Angeles night greeted them as they stepped out of the Grand Theater doors. The contrast was startling, the glitz and glamour of the event behind them, the raw chaos of flashing lights and eager reporters in front of them. The second Keanu appeared, outside, the crowd erupted. Photographers pushed closer, reporters called out his name, fans tried to grab his attention, but instead of stopping for them, Keanu did something no one expected. He gently placed a hand on Emily's back, guiding her and Lily toward a quay at her exit. It was an almost protective gesture, one that Emily definitely noticed. She tightened her hold on Lily, keeping her head down as the noise around them swelled the cameras, the questions, the way people gawked. It wasn't a world she belonged to. It wasn't a world she ever wanted to be in. Keanu, sensing her discomfort, leaned down, just slightly, his voice low but reassuring. "Just keep walking, I'll get you both out of here." And somehow Emily believed him. They moved quickly, slipping past the main chaos and toward a more secluded parking lot. By the time they reached the quiet of the car, the noise had dulled the flashing lights, no longer a distraction. Emily let out a long breath, her grip on Lily finally relaxing. "Thank you," she murmured, turning to look at him. "I don't know how you deal with all of that every day," Keanu chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You get used to it?" "Kind of." Emily gave him a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. No one should have to get used to that. He smiled at that. A real, genuine smile Lily stirred. In her arms, then blinking up at them sleepily, she rubbed at her eyes, her small voice breaking the quiet popcorn man. Keanu laughed softly. "Yeah, kiddo." Lily gave a big sleepy yawn before reaching out tiny arms stretching toward him in a way that caught both adults completely off guard. Keanu's heart clenched. It was such a simple thing, a child's instinctive trust. He glanced at Emily, silently asking for permission. Emily hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because something about this moment felt too surreal, too important. But then she slowly nodded, and just like that, Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood action star, the global icon, the man who had spent so much of his life feeling isolated, was standing in a quiet parking lot, holding a sleepy 2-year-old in his arms. Lily immediately rested her head against his shoulder, sighing contentedly. Keanu barely breathed for a split second. The world around him disappeared. He had held children before, his sister as a baby, the nieces and nephews of close friends. But this was different. This wasn't family, and yet it felt like something just as precious. Emily watched the scene unfold, her throat tightening with an emotion she couldn't quite name. There was something so natural about the way Keanu held Lily, as if it wasn't strange or unexpected, as if he had done it 1,000,000 times before, in some other life with someone else he had loved. A part of Emily wanted to say something to break the strange, spoken weight that had settled between them. But before she could, Keanu spoke first. "Tame reminds me of someone." His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. "Someone you lost?" she asked softly. Keanu's jaw tensed. He nodded. There was no need to say who she already knew. Jennifer, Ava, Kim, the pieces of his heart that life had taken too soon. Emily reached out, then not thinking, just acting, and lightly placed a hand over his under-crisp handshake. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Keanu finally met her eyes, and in that moment they weren't strangers anymore. They weren't an actor and a fan. They weren't just two people who had crossed paths by accident. They were two souls who had seen loss, who had felt loneliness in its truest, rawest form. And now, standing here in the quiet of the night, they were something else entirely. Maybe they were exactly what the other had been missing for the first time in years. Keanu let himself wonder, was this fate or just another fleeting moment he wasn't meant to hold on to? And more importantly, could he even let himself try? The night air was cool against Keanu's skin, but the warmth of Lily's tiny body nestled against his chest made it almost unnoticeable. The little girl had completely relaxed in his arms, her soft breaths rhythmic, her small fingers curled lightly against his jacket. Keanu held her carefully, his grip instinctively protective. It had been years since he had held a child like this, since he had held Ava, the daughter he lost before she even had the chance to live. Emily stood close by, watching them with an expression Keanu couldn't quite read. A mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something even deeper. He wasn't sure how to process it. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to, for a man who had spent most of his life avoiding emotional entanglements, who had learned to exist within a world where love was fleeting, where happiness was a moment rather than a destination. This felt dangerously close to something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. And yet here he was, a sleepy toddler in his arms, a woman looking at him like she saw the person, not the persona. It was strange, it was unexpected, and it was nice. "Are you sure you're okay?" Emily finally asked, breaking the silence. Keanu nodded, but the truth was more complicated than that he was okay. But he also wasn't. He was okay, in the sense that he was standing here, breathing, existing. But there was something about Lily, about her trust, about the way she had reached for him so instinctively, that had cracked something deep inside of him, a part of himself he thought had long been buried. "Yeah," he finally said, offering a small, tired smile. "I'm okay." Emily didn't seem convinced. She hesitated, shifting slightly on her feet, before finally making a decision. "Do you want to come inside for a bit?" she asked. Q blinked inside. Emily gestured toward her car. "Lily's asleep. If I take her home now, she's going to wake up the second I move her. And if that happens," she gave him a wry smile, "it'll be a very, very long night for both of us." Keanu chuckled, glancing down at the little girl who had somehow managed to steal his heart in less than an hour. He should have said no. He knew that this wasn't his life. This wasn't supposed to be his life. But for some reason, when he looked up and saw Emily watching him, waiting, not with expectation but with quiet understanding, he found himself nodding. Then the box came open. "Okay?" Emily smiled, a real genuine smile, and for the first time in a long time, Keanu wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was exactly where he was meant to be. The drive to Emily's apartment was quiet, save for the occasional sigh from Lily as she snuggled deeper into Keanu's arms. He hadn't let her go, and strangely enough, he didn't want to. The streets of Los Angeles blurred past the city lights, casting an ethereal glow through the windshield. Keanu barely noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere. How had he ended up here? Not just in this car, not just in this moment, but in a place where he actually wanted to stay. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "You don't have to do this, you know." Keanu turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers. "Do what this," she said, "simply be here, carry her, walk us to the car. You don't have to pretend." Something about her words caught him off guard. "I'm not pretending," he said quietly. Emily's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as if she wasn't sure how to respond to that. Instead, she simply nodded, and in that small, silent moment, Keanu realized something. He didn't just want to be here, he needed to be. Emily's apartment was small but warm, the kind of place that felt lived in, loved safe. There were toys scattered near the couch, a small bookshelf filled with children's stories, a few drawings pinned to the refrigerator. It wasn't grand, it wasn't Hollywood, but it was real, and Keanu found himself liking that more than he wanted to admit. Emily set down her bag and turned to him. "You can lay her down on the couch if you want. I'll grab a blanket." Keanu hesitated. Lily was still clinging to him, but slowly, carefully, he lowered himself onto the couch and settled her against the cushions. She stirred slightly, her small fingers reaching out, searching Keanu's heart. Twisted, he didn't even think, he just took her tiny hand in his, and like magic, she settled immediately. Emily, standing nearby with a blanket in her hands, paused. Her eyes met Keanu's, and in that moment, there were no cameras, no red carpets, no interviews or flashing lights. There was just a man who had lost everything, a woman who had been left behind, and a child who didn't know She had just unknowingly stitched two broken hearts together. Emily exhaled softly, draping the blanket over Lily before stepping back for a long while. They just stood there, no words, no explanations, just understanding. Finally, Keanu broke the silence. "Be special," Emily smiled softly. "Yeah, she is." He hesitated. "You are too." Emily's breath caught in her throat for a second. Keanu thought he had said too much. But then slowly, Emily sat down beside him. "You don't have to say that," she murmured. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and Keanu, for the first time in a long time, felt seen, not as an actor, not as a legend, just as a man. A man who maybe wasn't as lost as he thought he was. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Stay. Keanu didn't move, didn't breathe. She wasn't asking him to stay forever, just for tonight, just long enough for her to believe that she wasn't alone. Just long enough for him to believe it too. Keanu exhaled, then slowly, carefully, he nodded, and as the night stretched on, as Lily dreamed on the couch and Emily curled up beside him, Keanu let himself believe just for a moment that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the modest living room. Keanu stirred on the couch, blinking against the sunlight. For a moment he wasn't sure where he was. Then he heard the small, familiar sound. Soft giggles, the rustling of tiny feet against the wooden floor. He turned his head and saw Lily standing near the couch, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Her golden curls were a mess, her tiny hands gripping her stuffed bunny as she tilted her head. "Popcorn man," she whispered excitedly. Keanu's lips quirked into a smile. "Morning, Lily." She climbed onto the couch without hesitation, settling beside him, her legs swinging slightly. She looked at him for a long moment before reaching out and gently poking his cheek with one small finger. "You've slept here," she stated with the unfiltered honesty only a child could have. Keanu chuckled. "I did." Lily considered this for a moment, then nodded in approval. The warmth in his chest caught him off guard. This simple moment, this feeling of belonging, was something he had forgotten he needed. Just then, Emily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She froze when she saw the two of them together, her gaze lingering on Keanu, then on Lily, who was now happily leaning against him. For a moment she just stood there watching. Something in her chest tightened. She had spent so long doing everything alone, carrying the weight of motherhood, the exhaustion, the responsibility, never expecting anyone to stay. But Keanu was still here. It shouldn't have meant as much as it did, but it did. "Morning," he greeted, his voice soft. Emily swallowed, forcing herself to snap out of it. "Morning," she cleared her throat, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must have looked. "Did you sleep okay?" Keanu stretched slightly. "Yeah, your couch is surprisingly comfortable." Lily giggled, delighted by this revelation. "Told you it's the best couch ever." Emily smiled, stepping into the room. "Coffee, Vivian." Keanu nodded. "That sounds great." As she walked into the kitchen, Keanu sat back, watching Lily as she hummed softly to herself. There was something almost surreal about this moment, this quiet domestic. Normally, he had spent so many years drifting, moving from project to project, never truly planting roots. And yet here he was, not because he had to be, but because he wanted to be. Emily returned a few minutes later, handing him a mug of coffee before settling into the chair across from him. Lily climbed off the couch and toddled to her mother's lap, curling up against her for a moment. None of them spoke. Then, Millie finally broke the silence. "Well, happens now?" Keanu exhaled, staring into his coffee. That was the question, wasn't it? What did happen now? Did he walk away? Let this remain a fleeting moment, a memory of a single night that changed something deep inside of him. Or did he stay? Could he stay? I don't know, he admitted. Emily nodded as if she had expected that answer. I didn't expect you to stay last night, she said softly, and I won't expect you to stay after today. There was no bitterness in her voice, just understanding. Keanu looked at her, something tightening in his chest. Emily, she shook her head, offering him a small bittersweet smile. It's okay, but it wasn't okay that she had learned to expect people to leave. It wasn't okay that someone like her, someone so kind, so strong, so deserving, had spent so long doing this alone. Keanu set his coffee down and leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. I don't know what happens next, he said honestly, but I don't want this to be the last time. Emily's breath caught. She hadn't realized how much she had wanted to hear those words until he said them. Okay, she whispered, a small, hesitant beginning. Keanu nodded a quiet agreement passing between them. They didn't have all the answers, but maybe that was okay. Maybe for the first time in a long time, neither of them had to figure everything out alone. The next few weeks blurred into something neither of them had expected. Keanu found himself returning to Emily in Lily's apartment more often than he had planned. Sometimes it was just for an hour, just to check in, to bring dinner, to sit with Lily and listen to her talk about her day. Other times he stayed longer, and each time it felt more natural. Lily started calling him Popcorn Man, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emily started smiling, more really smiling, in a way that made Keanu realize just how much she had carried on her own. And Keanu started to heal. It wasn't a perfect story. There were moments of doubt, moments where he wondered if he was doing the right thing, but then he would see Lily's tiny hand reaching for Emily's quiet understanding, and suddenly it didn't feel so complicated, it just felt right. One evening, as they sat together in Emily's small living room, Lily curled up in Keanu's lap. Emily beside them, Keanu found himself saying something he hadn't planned. I have a movie premiere next weekend. Emily glanced at him. Oh, he hesitated, then he looked at her. Really looked at her. I want you both to come with me, Emily. Froze, Panu, he held her gaze. Not as some publicity thing, not as an actor. Bringing guests just as me. Emily's throat tightened. Are you sure? He nodded. Yeah, I am Lily. Unaware of the weight of the moment, perked up. Does this mean we get more popcorn? Keanu laughed, pulling her close. As much as you want, kid. Emily's heart swelled, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that this was real, that Keanu wasn't just passing through, that maybe this was the beginning of something neither of them ever saw coming. A second chance, a new family, a future worth believing in. This story is more than just a heartwarming encounter. It's a reminder of the unexpected connections that can change our lives in a world where fame often creates distance. Keanu Reeves once again proves that true kindness knows no boundaries. His genuine interaction with little Lily and his growing bond with Emily highlights something we often forget. Sometimes the smallest gestures, a shared bucket of popcorn, a few kind words can have the most profound impact in today's fast-paced world, where people are quick to judge and slow to connect. This story encourages us to pause and appreciate the little moments. It reminds us that kindness isn't just about grand gestures, it's about showing up, being present, and choosing to care when no one expects you to. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video to spread the message of compassion and human connection. Who knows, maybe your small act of kindness today will change someone's life tomorrow. Stay tuned for more incredible stories that remind us of the goodness still left in the world.